Arthur Vance adjusted his silk bow tie in the hallway mirror, his eyes sliding right past the reflection of his wife, Nia, who stood quietly in the kitchen doorway wearing her faded gray sweatpants. The mirror was an antique French piece, gilded and excessively heavy, much like everything else Arthur insisted on filling their Gold Coast penthouse with. It reflected a man who looked every inch the successful Chicago executive, silver hair carefully coiffed, a tuxedo that cost more than a mid-sized car, and a jawline set in grim determination. It also reflected a woman who looked like she had just finished scrubbing the floors. "Arthur," Nia said softly. Her voice was low, a warm contralto that usually soothed him, but tonight it only seemed to irritate the nerves along his neck. "You forgot your scarf. The wind off the lake is brutal tonight." Arthur didn't turn around. He leaned closer to the glass, inspecting a microscopic pore on his nose. "I don't need the scarf, Nia. It ruins the line of the coat. Besides, I'll be valet parking." He finally swiveled, his eyes raking over her baggy clothing with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "For God's sake, step away from the window. Mrs. Gable across the street is probably watching. I don't want the neighbors thinking I keep a housekeeper I can't afford to dress properly." Nia didn't flinch. She was used to this. For 3 years, she had been the ghost in Arthur Vance's machine. She stepped back into the shadow of the kitchen, her hands clasping loosely in front of her. "I was just making tea," she said. "I didn't think anyone was looking. People like the Gables are always looking, Nia. That's what high society does. They judge." Arthur walked over to the side table and picked up his platinum cufflinks, struggling to fasten the left one with one hand. "Which is exactly why you're staying here. Tonight is delicate. The Sterling Winter Gala isn't a church picnic. It's sharks in expensive suits." He groaned, fumbling with the tiny metal clasp. Nia stepped forward instinctively. "Let me help." She reached out, her fingers steady. But before she could make contact, Arthur jerked his arm away as if she were holding a burning coal. "Don't," he snapped. He saw the hurt flash in her dark eyes and quickly adjusted his tone to something patronizingly gentle. "Your hands, Nia. You've been cooking with onions and garlic. I can't have that smell on silk. The chairman of the Phoenix Trust is going to be there tonight. These people smell weakness. They smell mediocrity." Nia slowly lowered her hands. She looked at them, clean, manicured, and free of any scent, though Arthur never bothered to check. "The Phoenix Trust," she repeated, her face impassive. "That's the group funding the merger?" "The group saving my career if I play my cards right," Arthur corrected, finally managing to snap the cufflink into place himself. He grabbed his cashmere overcoat. "They're sending a representative. Some high-level director. I need to charm him. I need to make him believe that Bennett Industries is the future. And frankly, darling..." He paused by the door, offering her a tight, apologetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You just wouldn't fit in. The conversation will be about global markets, equity structures, capital flow. It's not your world. You'd be bored. Or worse, uncomfortable." "I see," Nia said. "It's for my own good." "Exactly. It always is." Arthur checked his reflection one last time. He looked powerful. He looked single. "I'll be late. Don't wait up. And please, Nia, turn off the lights in the front room. It saves electricity, and it keeps prying eyes out." He opened the heavy oak door. A gust of freezing wind from the hallway rushed in, but he didn't look back. He stepped out, and the door clicked shut with a sound like a vault locking. Silence descended on the apartment instantly. It was a cold silence, amplified by the marble floors and the glass walls that looked out over the freezing darkness of Lake Michigan. For a long moment, Nia Vance didn't move. She stood exactly where he had left her, a small figure in gray sweatpants, surrounded by furniture she wasn't allowed to move and art she hadn't chosen. Then the elevator chimed down the hall. The faint hum of the lift descending could be heard through the walls. Nia's posture shifted. The slump in her shoulders vanished. Her chin lifted. The dull, submissive expression she had worn for the last hour evaporated, replaced by a gaze that was sharp, clear, and terrifyingly intelligent. She walked to the window, the very one Arthur had forbidden her to stand near. She looked down at the street, 50 stories below. She watched the black speck of Arthur's Mercedes pull out of the garage and merge into the stream of traffic heading toward the Drake Hotel. Global markets and equity structures, she murmured to the empty room. A small, dry smile touched her lips. You're right, Arthur. It is a complicated world. She turned away from the window and walked toward the kitchen island. She didn't reach for the tea kettle. Instead, she reached into the deep pocket of her sweatpants and pulled out a slim, black smartphone. Not the clunky model Arthur allowed her to have on their family plan, but a secure, encrypted device. She unlocked it with a thumbprint. There were 12 missed messages, all from board members, all marked with high priority. She ignored them and went straight to her contacts. She pressed a single speed dial number and brought the phone to her ear. Angela? Nia said, her voice dropping the soft, hesitant timbre she used with her husband. It was now the voice of a woman who commanded millions. He's gone. Bring the car around. We have 45 minutes. If you are already hooked by Nia's silent strength and can't wait to see her transformation, please drop the number 8 in the comments below to let me know you're here with us. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend you subscribe to Black Brilliance and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of this justice. Your support helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you every day. Now, let's continue and see what happens when the invisible wife finally decides to be seen. The guest room, at the end of the hall, was always locked, and Arthur believed it was filled with old boxes of winter coats and holiday decorations. But when Nia turned the key, the door opened to reveal a state-of-the-art command center and dressing suite. The air inside was different here, scented with lavender and crisp efficiency, lacking the oppressive weight that filled the rest of the penthouse. Nia stepped inside and closed the door, locking it with a satisfying click. The room was bathed in the soft glow of 3 high-definition monitors mounted on the far wall. They displayed real-time market trends, the Phoenix Trust's charity portfolio, and a live feed of the entrance to the Drake Hotel. You're cutting it close, Ms. Evans, a voice said from the corner. Angela, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s dressed in impeccable black, stepped out from behind a rack of clothes. She wasn't just a stylist. She was Nia's right hand, her gatekeeper, and the only person who knew the full extent of the double life Nia had been leading. He talked longer than usual, Nia said, walking past the monitors to the vanity table. He wanted to make sure I knew exactly how unworthy I was before he left. It's part of his ritual. Angela shook her head, her hands already moving to unzip the garment bag hanging prominently in the center of the room. The man is burying himself and handing you the shovel. The board is assembled. Julian just sent a text. He's stalling the opening remarks until you're on site. Good. Nia sat down in the velvet chair. She looked at her reflection, the messy bun, the tired eyes, the gray sweatshirt. It was a disguise she had perfected over 3 years. It was amazing how invisible a black woman could become simply by looking tired and wearing cheap clothes. Arthur saw what he expected to see, a charity case he had rescued, not the woman whose investment strategies had quietly tripled his company's stock value without his knowledge. Let's erase her, Angela, Nia said quietly. Bring out Ms. Evans. The next 30 minutes were a blur of practiced precision. Angela worked with the speed of a pit crew. The gray sweatpants were discarded into a hamper. Nia's hair, usually pulled back strictly to avoid Arthur's critiques about it being unruly, was released. Angela styled it into an architectural masterpiece, high, regal, and unapologetically natural, weaving a thin gold thread through the dark coils. While Angela worked on the makeup, contouring that highlighted Nia's high cheekbones and a deep, blood-red lipstick that signaled war, Nia reviewed the briefing papers on her iPad. Arthur's proposal, Nia noted, swiping through a PDF. He's asking for $5 million in bridge financing. He's desperate, Angela murmured, applying a final brush of setting powder. His liquidity is drying up. He's betting everything on the Phoenix Trust saving him tonight. He has no idea the director he wants to charm is the woman whose cooking he refuses to eat. Nia set the iPad down. He's about to find out. Stand up, Angela commanded gently. Nia stood. The gown was waiting. It was custom-made for this moment. A deep, shimmering emerald green silk that looked like liquid money. It was structured at the shoulders, suggesting armor, but flowed elegantly to the floor. As Nia stepped into it and Angela zipped the back, the physical weight of the silk seemed to ground her. She wasn't just dressing up. She was armoring up. Angela moved to the small safe in the wall, typed in a code, and pulled out a velvet box. Inside sat a pair of teardrop diamond earrings and a matching necklace. They were exquisite, vintage Cartier. He thinks these are paste copies, Nia said, touching the cold stones as Angela fastened them around her neck. He told me once not to wear them in public because they looked too gaudy for a housewife. Well, Angela said, stepping back to admire her work. Good thing you're not a housewife tonight. Suddenly, the phone on the vanity buzzed. It was a direct line. Nia hit the speaker button. Go for Evans, she said, her voice crisp. Madam Chairwoman. The voice of Julian Sterling filled the room. He sounded anxious but respectful. The guests are seated. Mr. Vance is working the room. He's currently at the bar telling the vice president of operations that his wife is at home battling a severe migraine. Nia laughed, a short, sharp sound. A migraine? Last time it was the flu. He's running out of ailments. He's looking for you, Nia. Or rather, he's looking for the director. He's quite aggressive about it. He told my assistant that he won't take no for an answer. Let him look, Julian. Let him get comfortable. I want him to feel like he owns the room right before I take it from him. We are ready when you are. The car is in the alleyway to avoid the doorman your husband tips. I'm on my way. Nia ended the call. She stood before the full-length mirror. The transformation was absolute. The woman staring back wasn't Nia Vance, the shadow. This was Brianna Evans, the power broker. The emerald silk caught the light, making her look like a queen from a country Arthur had never bothered to learn the name of. You look. Angela paused, searching for the word. Dangerous. I feel dangerous, Nia admitted. She picked up a gold clutch. She walked to the private service elevator at the back of the suite, an exit Arthur didn't even know existed in the building. It led directly to the service alley. As the doors opened, the cold wind hit her, but this time, she didn't shiver. She welcomed it. A sleek black limousine was waiting, engine purring, exhaust curling into the snowy night air. The driver, a man who had driven her to board meetings for 2 years while Arthur thought she was at the grocery store, held the door open. Good evening, Ms. Evans, he said. Good evening, James. As she stepped into the private limousine waiting in the alley, Nia checked her reflection one last time in the darkened window. The red lipstick was perfect. The diamonds were real. The silence was over. He wanted a trophy, she whispered to the cold Chicago night. Tonight, he gets the whole empire. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and the desperation of men like Arthur Vance who needed just one lucky break to survive. Beneath the colossal crystal chandeliers that dripped light like frozen rain, 200 of Chicago's elite mingled, sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than Arthur's first car. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the black void of Lake Michigan churned, but inside, the air was warm, golden, and thick with the murmur of deals being struck. Arthur stood near the ice sculpture, swirling the amber liquid in his Scotch glass. He checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. His palms were sweating, a rarity for him. He wiped them discreetly on his tuxedo trousers. Arthur, there you are, a voice chirped. He turned to see Sarah, a junior partner at a rival firm, approaching with a glass of white wine. She looked around him, scanning the empty space at his elbow. I was hoping to finally meet the mysterious Mrs. Vance. You said she might come tonight? Arthur let out a practiced, weary sigh, a sound he had perfected over 3 years of social climbing. I tried, Sarah. I really did. But Nia, well, she's fragile. The winter air triggers her migraines, and frankly, crowds like this overwhelm her. She's a simple woman. The noise, the complexity of the conversation, It's just too much for her. That's a shame, Sarah said, though her eyes were already drifting away, looking for someone more important. It must be hard for you, carrying the social load alone. One does what one must for family, Arthur said, adjusting his bow tie with false modesty. I left her resting with a cup of tea. It's where she's happiest. He took a large gulp of scotch. The lie tasted smooth, familiar. He scanned the room, ignoring the pang of guilt that tried to surface. He wasn't lying to be cruel, he told himself. He was lying to protect his image. And right now, his image needed to be perfect. He needed to find the representative from the Phoenix Trust. Rumor had it the trust was sending their director to personally vet the companies vying for the $5 million grant. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. A booming voice echoed through the hall. The jazz quartet fell silent. The murmur of the crowd died down. Julian Sterling, the silver-haired host of the gala and CEO of Sterling Corp., stood on the raised stage at the far end of the ballroom. He adjusted the microphone, his face beaming with a secret he couldn't wait to share. Arthur straightened his spine. This was it. The introduction. Tonight is a special night, Julian began. Usually, the Phoenix Trust operates from the shadows. They are the silent engine behind so many of our city's successes. But tonight, for the first time in the Trust's history, the Chairwoman has decided to join us personally. Arthur blinked. Chairwoman?
He had assumed it would be a man.
He quickly mentally recalibrated his charm offensive. She is a woman of exceptional vision, Julian continued, his eyes twinkling as he looked toward the massive mahogany double doors at the entrance of the ballroom. She has reviewed every proposal submitted tonight. She knows your numbers, she knows your projections, and she knows your values. Please join me in welcoming the president of the Phoenix Trust, Ms. Brianna Evans. The room erupted in polite, eager applause. Arthur clapped enthusiastically, craning his neck to see. He wanted to be the first to make eye contact. He wanted to be the first to smile. The heavy doors swung open. The spotlight cut through the dim ambience of the room, creating a path of blinding white light from the entrance to the stage. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then, a figure stepped into the light. The applause faltered, then died out completely, replaced by a collective intake of breath. The silence that followed was heavy, sudden, and absolute. The woman standing in the doorway was breathtaking. She wore a gown of emerald green silk that seemed to flow around her like liquid jewelry, structured at the shoulders to suggest royalty, yet draped to accentuate a silhouette of undeniable power. Her hair was swept up in an intricate, regal style, woven with gold thread that caught the spotlight. At her throat, diamonds, large, teardrop stones that looked terrifyingly real, glittered like captured stars. But it wasn't the dress or the jewels or the makeup that stopped the room. It was her presence. She didn't walk, she glided. She moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, her chin held high, her eyes sweeping over the crowd with a cool, assessing gaze. She looked like a queen entering a court of subjects she had already judged. She walked past the stunned doormen. She walked past the frozen waiters. She walked straight down the center of the path cleared by the spotlight. Arthur, standing near the front, felt a strange buzzing in his ears. The woman looked familiar. The curve of her jaw, the shade of her skin, the way she held her hands. But that was impossible. The woman he knew was at home in sweatpants, drinking tea, afraid of the neighbors. The woman he knew was small. This woman was a giant. He took a step forward, squinting against the glare of the spotlight. The woman turned her head slightly as she passed him, acknowledging Julian on stage. The profile was unmistakable. Arthur's brain short-circuited. The world tilted on its axis. He looked at the emerald earrings, the ones he had called gaudy. He looked at the eyes, the dark, intelligent eyes he had avoided looking into for 3 years. Arthur, holding his glass of scotch halfway to his mouth, turned to see what everyone was staring at. His brain short-circuits. He recognizes the earrings. Then the eyes. The glass slips from his fingers and shatters loudly on the marble floor. Nia? If that shattering glass left you on the edge of your seat, please comment the number 3 below to let me know you are witnessing this moment with us. And if you haven't joined our community yet, I highly recommend you subscribe to Black Brilliance and turn on the bell. You won't want to miss how Nia handles this confrontation. Your support helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you every day. Now, let's continue and watch Arthur try to pick up the pieces. The sound of shattering glass was the only thing that could compete with the hush that had fallen over the ballroom, but Arthur Vance didn't even look down at the scotch soaking into his expensive Italian shoes. The amber liquid seeped into the dark carpet, a spreading stain that mirrored the panic blooming in his chest. Around him, the spell of silence broke into 1,000 whispered fragments. Heads turned from the woman in emerald to the man standing amidst the broken shards. Arthur felt their eyes, judging, confused, amused. Just minutes ago, he had been the charming executive with the invalid wife. Now, he was the man gaping at the most powerful person in the room like a fish pulled from water. He blinked, hoping the hallucination would fade. But the woman didn't disappear. She stood at the edge of the dance floor, bathed in light, accepting the silent adoration of the room with a calm that Arthur had never seen in their apartment. It was Nia. It had to be Nia.
But it couldn't be.
Nia was small. Nia was quiet. Nia wore gray sweatpants and flinched when he raised his voice. This woman stood 6 feet tall at her heels, her shoulders back, her expression one of terrifying serenity. Unpresentable, he had called her. Sick. The lies he had fed his colleagues curdled in his throat. Panic shifted swiftly into anger, the familiar, hot indignation of a man who feels he is being mocked. She was doing this to humiliate him. She had stolen an invitation. She had raided his credit cards for that dress. She was playing dress-up in his world, trying to embarrass him in front of the very people he needed to impress. He didn't think. He reacted. Arthur shoved past a waiter, ignoring the man's startled gasp. He marched across the parquet floor, his face flushed a deep, ugly red. He didn't see the chairwoman of the Phoenix Trust. He saw his disobedient wife, who had left the house without permission. As he closed the distance, he saw Nia's eyes lock onto him. They didn't widen in fear. They didn't plead for forgiveness. They simply watched him approach, cool and detached, as if he were a waiter bringing the wrong order. Arthur stopped 2 feet from her, invading her personal space. He lowered his voice to a furious hiss, spittle flying from his lips. "What do you think you are doing?" Nia didn't flinch. She adjusted her clutch, her movements languid. "Good evening, Arthur. You've made a mess on the carpet. Don't play games with me," Arthur whispered harshly, reaching out to grab her elbow, a gesture he had used 1,000 times to steer her, to control her. "You are leaving.
Now.
Before you embarrass me further. Where did you get that dress? Who let you in?" His fingers were inches from her skin when a shadow fell over him. "Is there a problem here?" The voice was smooth, cultured, and carried the unmistakable weight of authority. Arthur froze. He looked up to see Julian Sterling, the host of the gala and one of the wealthiest men in Chicago, standing beside Nia. Julian wasn't looking at Arthur. He was looking at Arthur's hand, which was still hovering aggressively near Nia's arm. Arthur snatched his hand back, as if he had been burned. "Mr. Sterling," he stammered, his charm mode flickering back on like a broken bulb. I apologize for the interruption. This woman, she's confused. She's crashed the event. I was just escorting her out so she doesn't bother your guests." Julian stared at Arthur for a long, uncomfortable second. Then he turned his back on him completely. He faced Nia, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect that hit Arthur like a physical blow. "Madam Chairwoman," Julian said, his voice projecting clearly to the listening crowd. "Your entrance was impeccable. The board has been waiting for you. We were worried the weather might delay you." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. The room seemed to tilt. "Chairwoman?" The word echoed in his skull. The Phoenix Trust. The invisible entity holding the purse strings. The director he had planned to charm. "The weather was manageable, Julian," Nia replied, her voice smooth and confident, lacking a single tremor. "Though the traffic was heavier than expected. We are honored you chose to reveal yourself tonight," Julian continued, smiling warmly. "Especially given the magnitude of the grants being decided." He turned back to Arthur, his expression hardening into something glacial. "Mr. Vance, I see you've met our majority shareholder. Though I believe you two know each other?" The trap snapped shut. Arthur looked at Julian, then at Nia. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His brain was trying to reconcile 3 years of memories. Nia scrubbing dishes, Nia sitting in the dark, Nia nodding silently while he lectured her on business, with the reality standing before him. She was the money. She was the power. She was the yes or no on the $5 million that would save his company. And he had just tried to throw her out. He looked into her eyes, searching for a lifeline, for the wife who needed him. "Nia," he croaked, his voice cracking. "Honey." Nia looked at him. Her gaze was polite, distant, and utterly devastating. She looked at him not with anger, but with the polite indifference one offers a stranger at a bus stop. "Vaguely," she said. The word landed softer than a whisper, but cut deeper than a knife. A ripple of titters went through the nearby crowd. "Vaguely," she repeated, turning her attention back to Julian. "He's someone I used to know." "I see," Julian said, stepping smoothly between them, creating a physical barrier. "Well, we wouldn't want to keep you. Senator Mitchell has been asking for an introduction all evening. Shall we?" Arthur stood rooted to the spot. "Nia, wait," he said, desperation finally breaking through the shock. "You can't. I didn't know." "You never asked," she said simply, over her shoulder. She didn't wait for his response. She turned her back on him, the emerald silk swirling around her ankles. She took Julian's arm and glided away toward the VIP section, where senators and CEOs were already parting like the Red Sea to welcome her. Arthur opens his mouth to speak, to claim her, to salvage the situation, but Nia turns her back on him to greet a U.S. senator waiting for her hand. Arthur is left standing alone in the middle of the dance floor. Dinner was an elaborate 5-course affair featuring lobster thermidor and truffle risotto, but Arthur Vance sat at table 42, the overflow table near the swinging kitchen doors, unable to swallow a single bite. The clatter of waiters stacking dirty dishes provided a harsh soundtrack to his humiliation, a stark contrast to the melodic string quartet playing near the stage. From his exile in the back of the room, Arthur had a clear view of the head table. He saw the empty chair next to a rival CEO, the seat that had been reserved for Mr. Vance, president of Bennett Industries. That seat was now occupied by a coat. Meanwhile, at the center of the table, bathed in the warm glow of the candlelight, sat Nia. She wasn't just sitting, she was holding court. She laughed at something the mayor whispered, a genuine, throaty sound Arthur hadn't heard in years. She debated intently with the senator, her hands moving expressively. She looked radiant, intelligent, and completely unattainable. Arthur gripped his fork until his knuckles turned white. "She's playing a part," he told himself, desperate to salvage his reality. "She's my wife. She's the woman who panic cleans when she's stressed. I just need to get her alone. I can fix this. I can manage her." The chiming of a spoon against a crystal glass silenced the room. Julian Sterling stood up. "And now," Julian announced, "a few words from the woman who made tonight's generosity possible." Nia stood. She didn't need notes. She walked to the podium, adjusting the microphone with a steady hand. She looked out over the sea of faces, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the dark corner where table 42 sat. "We live in a world that is obsessed with packaging," Nia began, her voice clear and resonant. "We judge the book by its cover, the wine by its label, and the person by their title. We assume that silence is weakness. We assume that invisibility is a lack of worth." The room was deadly silent. Arthur felt sweat trickle down his back. "For the past 3 years," Nia continued, "I've been a silent partner in many ventures. I have watched leaders make decisions. And I have learned that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest. True value often hides in the places we refuse to look. The Phoenix Trust is dedicated to finding those diamonds in the rough and ensuring that fool's gold," she paused, letting the words hang, "is recognized for what it is." Applause thundered through the hall. It was a standing ovation. Arthur stood slowly, his legs feeling like lead, clapping mechanically while his mind raced. Fool's gold.
She was talking about him.
But she was also talking about money. She had the money. As the dinner concluded and guests began to drift toward the coat check and the dessert bar, Arthur made his move. He didn't go to the exit. He weaved through the crowd, dodging waiters, his eyes locked on the emerald gown. He intercepted her in a quiet corridor leading to the private suites, just as she was handing her empty champagne flute to a passing server.
Nia.
She turned. Up close, the diamonds looked even brighter, colder. She didn't smile. Arthur, I wondered if you'd left. Left? And miss your big moment. Arthur forced a smile, stepping into her space, engaging the charm that had won him clients for decades. He lowered his voice to an intimate rumble. Honey, you were incredible up there. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me? We could have, my God, think of what we could do together. You have the capital, I have the operational infrastructure. We make a great team, Nia. We always have. Nia looked at him, her head tilted slightly to the side, as if studying a particularly interesting insect. A great team, she repeated flatly. Is that what we are? Of course. Look, I know I've been stressed lately. Maybe I was hard on you, but it was for us. For our future. He reached out, trying to touch her hand. The merger, Nia. The Bennett Industries proposal. With your backing, we'd be unstoppable. I can run the company, you can handle the board. We keep it in the family. Nia looked at his hand, then reached into her gold clutch. Arthur's heart leaped.
The check.
She's going to give me the check. She pulled out a slim manila envelope and placed it in his open palm. I reviewed your proposal personally, Arthur, she said softly. Arthur ripped it open. His eyes scanned the document. It wasn't a check. It was a formal rejection letter, stamped with the Phoenix Trust seal. He froze. He read the highlighted paragraph at the bottom. Reason for rejection. Leadership character deficit. You can't do this, Arthur whispered, the charm dissolving into raw, ugly anger. You did this to spite me. You vindictive, petty. No, Nia cut him off. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the force of a gavel striking wood. I didn't reject the deal because of our marriage, Arthur. I didn't reject it because you forgot our anniversary or because you made me sleep in the guest room. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. I rejected it because for 3 years, I sat in the next room and listened to you on speakerphone. I heard how you talk about your subordinates. I heard how you mock your clients behind their backs. And I heard you tell your colleagues that your wife was a burden and a charity case because she was black and came from foster care. Arthur flinched. That was just locker room talk. It didn't mean anything. It meant everything, Nia said. It told me who you are. And the Phoenix Trust does not invest in leaders who lack integrity. If you cannot value the woman who washes your clothes and cooks your meals, you certainly cannot value the 500 employees depending on you for their livelihood. I am your husband, Arthur shouted, his voice echoing in the corridor. You owe me. I owed you my life once, Nia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. And I paid that debt every single day for 3 years by making myself small so you could feel big. The debt is paid, Arthur. She signaled to a large man in a dark suit standing discreetly by the door. Hotel security. Go home, Arthur, she said, turning away. But not to the penthouse. What? Arthur stared at her back. The locks were changed at 6 p.m. today, she said without looking back. Angela packed your bags. They're waiting with the doorman downstairs. I suggest you pick them up before it starts snowing harder. Nia. Arthur lunged, but the security guard stepped in, a wall of muscle blocking his path. Mr. Vance, the guard said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The exit is this way. Nia walked down the corridor, the emerald silk flowing behind her like water. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked with the steady rhythm of a woman who had finally put down a heavy load she had been carrying for far too long. The limousine ride away from the Drake Hotel was quiet, but for the first time in 30 years, the silence didn't feel like loneliness to Nia. It felt like peace. The heavy glass partitions separated her from the driver, and the tinted windows separated her from the city, creating a cocoon of warm leather and soft darkness. Nia leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the entrance, the speech, and the confrontation was beginning to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But it was a good tired. It was the exhaustion of a runner who had finally crossed the finish line after a marathon ran entirely uphill. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. The screen was lit up with notifications. First, she checked the blocked list. Arthur Vance, 14 attempted calls, 8 text messages. She didn't read them. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what they would say, a mix of bargaining, anger, and gaslighting. She swiped them away, permanently deleting the digital footprint of her marriage. Then, she opened her email. The inbox for the Phoenix Trust was flooded. Not with hate, but with gratitude. Messages from the director of the women's shelter, the head of the youth arts program, the struggling small business owners whose loans she had just approved. "Thank you for seeing us," one subject line read. Nia smiled, a tear finally escaping the corner of her eye. She wiped it away carefully, mindful of the makeup. Her mind drifted back to 3 hours ago, to the woman standing in the kitchen in gray sweatpants, flinching because her husband told her not to touch his cufflinks. That woman felt like a stranger now, a ghost she had exorcised. The woman in the back of this limo wore emerald silk and wielded the power to change lives. The transformation wasn't magic, it was math. It was the sum of 3 years of patience, compounding interest on her own self-worth. "We're here, Ms. Evans." The driver's voice came over the intercom, gentle and respectful. The car slowed to a halt not at the penthouse garage, but under the awning of the Four Seasons Hotel. Nia had booked the executive suite weeks ago. She wasn't going back to the apartment. That place was a mausoleum of bad memories. As the doorman opened the car door, a blast of icy wind tried to invade the warmth, but Nia stepped out into it with her head high. Meanwhile, 3 miles south, Arthur Vance was learning exactly how cold a Chicago winter could be. He stood on the curb outside the Drake Hotel, his coat collar turned up against the biting sleet. The valet stand was empty. His car keys were currently in Nia's purse, though he didn't know that yet. He had tried to hail a taxi for 10 minutes, but on a gala night, they were scarce. He shivered violently, his expensive tuxedo offering no protection against the wind coming off the lake. He reached into his pocket for his corporate credit card to call an Uber.
Declined.
He stared at the screen. "That's impossible," he muttered, teeth chattering. He tried his personal card.
Declined.
Account frozen by primary holder. The realization hit him harder than the wind. He wasn't the primary holder. He never had been. Nia had refinanced everything 2 years ago when his bad investments threatened the house. He had signed the papers without reading them, too arrogant to believe his wife understood finance better than he did. A taxi finally slowed down. Arthur lunged for the handle, desperate. The driver looked him up and down, a disheveled man in a tuxedo with snow in his hair and panic in his eyes. "Cash only, pal," the driver shouted through the window. Arthur patted his pockets. Empty. He had given his last 20 to the coat check girl for a coat he forgot to retrieve in his haste. I have a watch," Arthur stammered, unclasping the Rolex. "It's worth 10,000. The driver laughed, shaking his head. "I ain't a pawn shop. Walk it off." The taxi sped away, splashing gray slush onto Arthur's Italian loafers. Arthur stood alone in the cold, watching the taillights fade. He had spent 3 years treating his wife like she was invisible. Now, to the city he tried so hard to impress, he was the one who didn't exist. Back in the warmth of the Four Seasons, Nia entered her suite. It was vast, quiet, and smelled of fresh lilies. She kicked off her heels, letting them tumble onto the plush carpet. She walked to the wet bar, poured herself a glass of sparkling water, and stepped out onto the private balcony. The city of Chicago lay spread out before her, a grid of golden lights shimmering in the haze. From this height, the noise of the traffic was just a hum. She could see the Drake Hotel in the distance, a small toy castle. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. It tasted clean. She reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace, then the heavy emerald earrings. She laid them on the balcony railing, looking at them. They were beautiful armor, but they were heavy. "Goodbye, Arthur," she whispered. The wind carried the words away, scattering them over the city. It wasn't a curse. It was a release. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger required energy, and she had no more energy to waste on him. She had a board meeting at 9 a.m. She had $5 million to allocate. She had a life to live. She picked up the jewelry and walked back inside, sliding the glass door shut and locking it. Nia moved to the bedroom. On the bedside table, the hotel had placed a welcome card. "Welcome, Ms. Evans," it read in elegant script. She ran her finger over the name. Ms. Evans. It wasn't just a name. It was a promise she had made to herself in a foster home 40 years ago, that she would be someone. She reached out and clicked off the lamp. Darkness filled the room, but for the first time in a long time, Nia wasn't afraid of the dark. She closed her eyes, and within moments, she was asleep, dreamless, deep, and entirely free. Nia's journey reminds us that true worth isn't found in loud titles or expensive suits, but in the quiet strength of character we build when no one is watching. Arthur Vance lost a diamond because he was too busy chasing glitter, proving that when we judge others by their appearance, we're the ones who end up blind. If Nia's triumph resonated with you, or if you've ever found strength in silence, please share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. For more stories where dignity shines and justice prevails, please hit that subscribe button and join our Black Brilliance family today. Remember, your light doesn't need a spotlight to shine. It just needs you to believe in it.